Hello, everyone. Welcome into Windy City Gridiron Radio. With you, as always, your host, Robert Zaglinski. And tonight, I am pleased to be joined by Windy City Gridiron lead draft analyst, EJ Snyder. He's been making the podcast rounds the last few days. You heard him earlier this week on Lester Wiltfon, our editor-in-chief, and his T Formation podcast, reviewing some receivers, going over the Cameron Meredith situation. We've already gone through that lunacy, and EJ was going to help me go through some Des Bryant lunacy today and other positional previews not related to receiver. He's a busy man. He's got a lot going on, but he's taking some time. We really appreciate it. EJ, what's up?
Hey, happy to be here. Always fun to talk draft. Like you said, it's a busy time of year, but got to strike while the iron's hot, and there's plenty to talk about.
We're going to get to the draft in a second, EJ. First, as I kind of touched on, there's Des Bryant being released. The Bears obviously have a need now for a second receiver, depending on the confines of the offense that really no one truly understands yet, with Cameron Meredith leaving for the Saints. It's the same conversation as with any high-profile player that may or may not have anything left in the tank, because the casual fan is familiar with a guy that has a big name, and I wrote about it today. They're going to gravitate to that guy, whether he's an actual fit for the Bears offense or any team's offense, because every fan base does this. And they're going to pound the table for him, and we're going to have conversations about it because people bring it up. Regardless of that, EJ, do we think he's an actual fit here, or is this just another case of Twitter being Twitter and social media just jumping to something really easy, people being lemmings in a harsh description?
I think it's harsh, but I think you're right. It happens with every fan base. Everybody sees a guy that had a prime, and Dez definitely had a prime. He had a fairly prime skill set. He certainly plays for a high-profile team. And if your team is anywhere lacking in that position group, they're going to say, oh, he's available. Go get him. You got money. Go do it. And they don't, like you said, it's not – there's not a lot of consideration there about, does he have anything left? Does he fit the system? Does he like the coaches? Is the GM comfortable with what he's done in the past? There's just so many factors there, and I think a lot of those factors are probably stacked against Dez. He played for the Cowboys. Jerry Jones famously has a personal relationship with him. He even said so, I think, today in his release statement. One of the few players I've gotten really close to over the years. There's definitely investment there, but the double edge of that sword is that also means that Jerry Jones has bailed him out of a lot of trouble. And I've heard that rift kind of underneath the waves today around Twitter and certainly in back channel conversations that there's a lot of people around the NFL that have really no interest in Dez sort of as a person in their organization, regardless of whether he can catch passes. And I think that's going to be a consideration for a guy like Ryan Pace, who's been burned before with Ray McDonald and any other number of, sort of character-based things that haven't really gone that well. And there's whispers that, Dez is not all there in the head. I can't confirm any of that. I certainly, don't play in the Dallas market all that much, but I thought it was pretty telling that he said he wanted to stay in the NFC East, and pretty much throughout the day, all other three teams in the NFC East went, yeah, nope. Don't really have any interest in doing that. So I think he'll get a job for sure. I don't think it'll be for probably the money he wants, and I don't think it'll be with the Bears.
Yeah, it won't be with the Bears, because if it's Pace making that kind of move, you touched on it, then that flies in the face of this fresh start that they've been heavily marketing throughout all these national media appearances in the past few months, and in this kind of new era that they're trying to build, and this new narrative they're trying to picture to take on a guy like Dez. Again, we don't know so much as other than the back channel conversations you mentioned. To take on someone like him flies in the face of that. Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's true. And the other thing being, if you look back at what we do know about this offense, which is not a ton, but if you look at where it got started in Philadelphia and where it was in Kansas City, they haven't had a receiver like that. They haven't had that big body guy that's sort of a post up red zone threat. Everybody's based on speed. Even the tight ends aren't big like 6'6" jumpers. You know, they're guys like Travis Kelce who are really fast. He's got good size, but you know, you're looking at guys. They had their choice of guys. Went out and got a guy like Trey Burton, who's not the biggest guy, but he's quick. And the receivers are the same way. They haven't had giants out there that are a little bit slower and are going to sort of post up and win jump balls. That's not a role they've had filled in either place. So if you bring him in, where does he fit?
You just can't see it. If we had to figure a fit, EJ, because you just mentioned it, where would it be? I think I just saw Adam Schefter a few hours ago link Dez to Green Bay, which would make sense. I mean, they're trying to find whatever possible talent and try. They're going either they would seem to be, if they went with Dez, they'd be going with a lot of not reclamation projects, but trying to, you know, kind of squeeze out as much juice as possible left out of guys like Jimmy Graham and Muhammad Wilkerson, and then someone like Dez.
Yeah, that would be an ugly red zone trio. Having Devontae running, you know, Devontae Adams running the sort of slash slant route, and then having, you know, Graham and Dez posting up on either corner of the end zone running, you know, an in or out or a post corner or fade. That's you got to have some big corners to play that. So, and of course he's going to want to play with Aaron Rodgers because he's going to get some pinpoint passes, and Dak Prescott, for all his success, is not a pinpoint passer, and that showed up more this year as sort of more defensive coordinators racked up tape on him. A lot of the throws and the highlights you saw today from last year that Dez was catching were not on target. So a guy like Rodgers who can really thread the needle would be, you know, a really nice prospect to a guy like Dez.
And if there's anyone that can fix Dez, if there's anything left to fix, or if there's anything left to get something out of him, it would probably be Aaron Rodgers, who could make most of any receiver look competent, not to speak in hyperbolic fashion, but it's true. Yeah, I know. Go ahead.
Yeah, he has that effect, and it's maddening, but it's also, you have to sort of step back regardless of which team you root for and kind of realize what's going on, that he's one of the all-time greats in that he can always make the people around him look better. So I agree with you.
This is a saga that we will probably not be monitoring, but we had to address, EJ. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for taking up those few minutes, but
that's all right. You can drag me into it. I'm game.
Yeah, Twitter does that to people. Twitter does that to people, and we had to get through it. You can follow EJ on Twitter before we get into draft stuff. You can follow EJ on Twitter at the Draftsman FB. You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski, and follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. As I just said, we're talking edge prospects. EJ has a few favorites of his own and some other guys. And we're going to go today. We'll discuss edge and interior offensive line. As far as pass rushers, what are your thoughts on Florida State's Josh Sweat, who has had some past medical issues? Maybe wasn't always ideally used in Florida State. Is he worth a first-round pick? Is he a guy that could potentially fall to the Bears at 39, or are they at risk of just missing out on him? Overall, your prognosis.
Yeah, Sweat's an interesting guy. I actually read today that knee injury that he had was actually a lot closer to like a Zach Miller knee injury. He almost had his leg amputated. I hadn't heard that before. I knew the knee injury was pretty significant, and he still showed signs of it last year. If you watch his 2017 tape, especially early in the year, he's wearing a brace, but he guys that have had major work on their knees a lot of times don't extend fully, and you can tell in their gait that they're favoring one leg over the other. They're making all their power moves on one leg, and he still looked that way early in the season. Now, despite all that, he's a pretty refined edge rusher, and he got pressure. And there's not a lot of edge rushers in this draft, which means, yeah, he could go at the bottom end of the first round. Is he a top end of the first round pick? Definitely not. Too many risks, too many questions. Could they miss out if they wait until 39? They could. He could absolutely go at the end of the first round, especially if a couple other edge prospects go right in a row. There's not that many this year. And if a team wants one, somebody might reach for him.
Is he a guy that can be a day one starter, or like opposite Leonard Floyd, for example?
I think he can be, and you touched on it that he wasn't always used in the best way. In fact, he was used in some kind of unkind ways to his skill set at Florida State. They had that guy lined up in a 4-point stance for maybe 30 or 40% of his snaps, which is just not his game. And when you watch him out of that stance and in those alignments, head up over tackles and head up, inside shoulder on a tackle, stuff like that, his tape's not all that impressive, understandably. But when they stand him up, they even get him in a 3-point out wide, kind of a wide 9 stance, or they really stand him up in that 2-point stance, outside backer edge. Then his tape looks pretty good. He's got several moves. His hand use is really good. He was fairly quick even on one leg, and the tape just kind of lights up when he changes that alignment and that stance. So I think that sort of hid some of the talent he has. And, teams are going to see that. Scouts aren't stupid. Right. Well, most scouts aren't stupid, and they're going to see that too. I'm not the only one that saw that. Other people have commented on it as well. So, yeah, he's kind of that depending on how you view him and how you're going to employ him, he's either bottom of the first tier or right at the very, very top of the second tier. And again, the tiers aren't that deep this year. There's not that many edge rushers in general. So I would say end of the first round is totally possible. And if not, top half of the second round is where you're going to see that guy go, unless there's serious concern over the leg, and then he could fall a little bit. But I haven't heard that. And he didn't get invited back for combine medical rechecks, so everybody's seen what they wanted to see.
I know this was a guy that you tweeted at me about during the combine, a bit of an athletic freak. I think he had the best tests of any edge prospect at the combine. Georgia's Lorenzo Carter, who often actually, ironically, draws comparisons to a Georgia alum in Leonard Floyd. What are your thoughts on Carter?
You're absolutely right. He draws a lot of those comparisons. I don't think they're really fair at all. Athletically, he's very, very gifted. As a football player, he's not there yet. So he's one of those raw block of clay guys. He does have some flash plays, but this is where not watching highlights comes into play and watching full games. Yeah. If you watch play after play, there's a lot of dead plays in there. There's a lot of plays where he does not do anything. He's not very gifted as an outside rusher. That means his hand use is okay, but not great. Moves and counter moves are really what I would consider pretty basic, maybe even raw. He's got a ways to go. He's got a ton of tools, but he doesn't employ them all together. They don't all fit. He doesn't bring everything to bear on each successive play. So I think he's going to get overdrafted based on how he tested and that, again, potential. But if I had to rank him, he wouldn't be anywhere near my top 5.
So where would you take him then? So obviously you just said he'll be overdrafted. Where would you take him?
I would start looking at him middle to bottom of round 3 based on where he's at now. And he's definitely going to go before that, I think. I'd be surprised if he wasn't off the board in round 3, especially with all the compensatory picks. I'd be very surprised. If he was there top of round 4, there's something we don't know about, because he does have that athletic potential. And I think, again, if he goes to a team, this is where the landing spot is so important. If he goes to a team that has shown that they can take guys like that, the Vikings, for instance, and develop them. They took a guy out of LSU, Daniel Hunter, who was the same way. Everybody's like, well, yeah, he's a great athlete, but geez, he didn't put a lot together. And hey, that guy's playing pretty well up north. So if you have a staff that can do that, it can really sort of give you extra value in the draft. But I'm not so sure that Fangio's like that. Leonard Floyd was a lot farther along than Carter coming out. hand use was better, playing the run was better, setting the edge was better. People always complained that he couldn't do that, but that was untrue. In my write-up, I said, look, he needs to get bigger, but his technique is already pretty good. So I think Carter's probably going to get drafted above where I'd pick him. And, again, if he goes to a team that knows how to develop him, that could turn out to be a good move.
So wait, independently of that, so if the Bears did take him, you don't think Fangio is the kind of guy that could develop him? Is that?
I think he can.
I don't necessarily disagree with that.
I think he can, but I don't think he's got the skill to take really raw guys and turn them into world beaters. He would definitely make him, but is that going to be enough, especially if you pick a guy like that in the second round?
Okay, this guy is the consensus top edge. He's probably not going to lead the top 5. So most of my line of questioning here will center around whether he's worth trading up for if, say, he gets to 5 or 6. Bradley Chubb, your thoughts on this powerful maniac?
Yeah, he is a powerful guy. That's absolutely true. I just read Greg Cassell's scouting report of Bradley Chubb came out today, and I read it and sort of reread it and actually went back and watched a little extra tape on Chubb. My opinion throughout the lead up to the draft here has been that I really think Chubb is best as a 4-3 end on a true 4-3 team because he does have that power. But there's a lot of nuance there to his game. He's not a classic edge bender. So really when I think about a guy playing edge or rush outside linebacker or whatever you want to call that position, it's a guy with some speed and it's definitely a guy with some bend. He's not that player, but he is a devastatingly powerful player. He is quite quick as well, especially at his size, and his hand use is really good. So I think he could be an edge, but he would kind of be that counterpoint to Leonard Floyd. He's not as fast, not as bendy, but he could provide a lot of strength on the other side. He's a great, I don't want to say great, he's a very good fundamental football player, and I think he'll be productive, but I think he'll be productive kind of in the almost like the Mario Williams kind of way, and not the end of the year or end of the career Mario Williams, but the beginning, big, strong guy that is, very physically gifted, but is not that classic speed bend edge guy that everybody falls in love with, but sort of gets his sacks through, bull rush, hand use, and just being in the right place and hustle. Because he's a pretty instinctive football player too. He's not a just pin his ears back and go guy. He understands what the offense is trying to do. So he's a very good football player. Trade up, I just don't think the Bears have enough firepower to go get a guy like that. And I don't know that they should, because it's going to limit their opportunities later on down. They need more than one piece, basically.
Yeah, if you were going to do it, it would be for a quarterback. And if you were going to do it for an edge prospect, it would have to be someone that's a little better, I imagine, correct?
I would hope so, but they may see something there that just reminds them of, maybe Vic Fangio looks at that guy and thinks, hey, this guy's Justin Smith reincarnated, and I need him to make my defense work, and he bangs the table for him. If that's the case, sure, I'm all for it, but I wouldn't. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Marcus Davenport, so he's the small school riser here. He didn't necessarily test like a great athletic freak at the combine, but this is a guy that's probably not going to leave the first round, probably might not leave the top 20, and by many estimations is a typical Ryan Pace profile pick for a first rounder. So he's certainly a possibility. EJ, your thoughts on Davenport?
My thoughts on Davenport have changed. I was not wild about him. He got this huge bubble of, sort of push up the charts rising, if you will, right before the Senior Bowl. He went from sleeper you've never heard of to mid-round prospect to this guy's going in the first round guaranteed in about, it seemed like 3 weeks. And there was a lot of swirl, and that always sort of turns me off, because that kind of rise isn't based on his tape. It's based on people talking about it. The tape didn't change during those 3 weeks. So my first pass at Davenport, I wasn't all that impressed, because I was looking for a guy that was a really refined edge rusher. and I didn't see that, so I kind of looked away. After all that died down, after the combine, people started sort of reevaluating where he was going to be. I think you're right. He's doubtful with his potential to leave the first round. And he did run really well at the combine. We're talking about a guy that's, 265 pounds.
Well, yeah, relatively.
And ran like a 4.55 or a 4.6. Like, that's a big guy running basically cornerback speed. So he tested pretty well. His 3-cone wasn't amazing, but, this is a guy that can definitely move, a really good athlete. So I went back to the tape. It was about 2.5 weeks ago, and really looked and sort of said, okay, well, again, because I think you're right, it does sort of fit the pace profile of a guy that's athletically gifted, who's not quite there yet, but shows a ton of potential. And he's got great size too, and pace likes those guys who have length, especially at the edge position. So I went back and looked and said, okay, so if Davenport's the pick, what's the good thing about here? And it really changed my mind. He's not a great edge rusher. I didn't change my mind about that, but what I saw on the second pass when I sort of concentrated more fully was he's a really good, solid football player. He gets this project label because he's a project as an edge rusher, but as a player, as a linebacker, he's really good. He can stack and shed. He locks his arms out, keeps guys off him. His angles, his tackling, his understanding of gap control, leverage, all really, really good. I mean, when you talk about basic sort of building blocks of a football player, he doesn't need work there. Whereas we talk about a guy like Edmonds from Virginia Tech, and that guy needs a ton of work on those fundamentals.
Well, are you classifying Edmonds as an edge guy or as an?
No, I just mean as a player that everybody says, "Oh, he can do everything you want," right? He's an amazing athlete, but he's not a great football player right now. If you go back and look at Davenport, except for his edge rushing, he's a really good, solid football player. He makes a lot of plays. Yeah, I would take that guy and stick him with somebody like Chuck Smith, the Falcons alum who does pass rushing camps now, and say, look, Chuck, I need you to do two things. I need you to give this guy a primary move and a counter move to the inside. Give him 2 moves on the edge. I don't care what they are, whatever he does best, but give him 2 moves and give him back to me. And I would put him with Chuck Smith for about a month before OTAs and say, just learn those 2 things, do everything else you do well, come back and you can be that rotating situational edge rusher. And I feel pretty good about plugging him in as a starter at that point. Are you going to get a ton of sacks the first year? No, but he's going to grow into that role. And in the meantime, he's not a liability. He's a really solid football player.
Leading into that, so I imagine you wouldn't necessarily have an issue, and I think Ryan Pace would get a lot of heat for this because it would be considered a huge reach, and it kind of is a reach in general. But you wouldn't have a problem with the Bears taking him at number 8 overall, is what I'm gauging.
It's not a great value, but if they can't trade down, I would feel better about it than if they took a guy like Edmonds, who I think is just a bigger project overall. Okay, so and then overall, Davenport's less of a project than Carter too, I assume, correct? I think so. I think so, absolutely. Plus, he's got more upside. He's bigger and he's, I think, stronger and faster. He's a big dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's like 6'6", 265 or something. I mean, he's a big dude.
Yeah, that's why I think that people didn't really compare the tape, but I think that's mostly why he got those original Marcus Ware comparisons, because of small school and because he's as big as Ware or close to it.
Yeah,
I don't think those are necessarily otherwise valid, but yeah.
Arden
Key. So this is a guy that was the preseason edge number 1, and oh man, I mean, I don't know. It's been a tailspin since then. He had a senior season marked by a lack of effort and injuries. He didn't test well at the combine. I don't think he even really ran at the combine.
No, he didn't, and he didn't run well at his pro day.
He didn't run well at the pro day. It was like a 4.7 or a 4.8, which I could have ran.
It's not great. And there's a lot of questions with Arden Key. You mentioned most of them. If he'd come out after his junior season, would have been a consensus top 5 pick easily. Crazy freak of a rusher and an athlete combined, can just get around almost anybody, even playing in the SEC, and that's what you want. Came back, ballooned in weight, There's varying reports about why that happened. Some say he was asked to do that. Some say it was, lack of impulse control. I don't think we've got a comprehensive answer on that. Ended up leaving the team to treat marijuana addiction. Came back. Some say that was his decision and that was a very grown-up thing to do. Other people say he quit on his teammates. Really just depends. And this is a real conundrum of a film scout like me who looks at absolutely game tape first and then measurables to see if, what I see on tape is backed up by their athletic testing or refuted by their athletic testing. But then that's 2/3. And the other third is everything else. It's medicals, it's interviews with teams and coaches, it's interviews with the player, whiteboard sessions, how smart is he, how much can he pick up, all that stuff. And we don't get to see that stuff. And those are the biggest questions with Key. If Key comes in and I'd say about 245 is probably the perfect weight for him. If he levels out at 245 on an NFL strength and conditioning program and his head's in the right place, he's going to be a force. But there's just so many questions that he could go anywhere from the second round to undrafted, depending on what vibe people get with him in the room and whether or not they think he's committed to football and, whether his issues are sort of all behind him. If that's true, if he's a guy that's sort of overcome those things, he's a force. He's an amazing rusher. I think he's probably the best pure pass rusher in the class. If you look at his, his junior tape or his, 2 years ago tape. But I just don't have visibility to all the stuff that really matters in his case.
Again, so you say you don't have all the visibility to it, but with the best context you have, you're Ryan Pace. Where do you start considering Key right now? With
if you pick up a third round pick, and again you've met with the player and you're comfortable with that, your coaches like him, and you feel good about the plan that you have for the player, which is always important with any player you're going to draft. If he picked up a third round pick and it was middle of the third round and he's still there, I would absolutely start having some serious conversations. Gets to the fourth round, they've got 2 fairly high fourth round picks. You got to start, given the success rate of fourth round picks, that's probably as good a gamble as any. But Ryan Pace does great work in the fourth round. So, fourth and fifth round, he's been very, very successful. I think more successful than most of his peers. He's had his hits and misses, but his hits have been big. So that's the range. Middle of the third, you start having those conversations by sort of top of the fourth, middle of the fourth. If he's still there and you're comfortable with him, your team is set with him, absolutely you got to take a shot at that.
2 more consensus edge guys, one of which will be your favorite, and then you can start throwing out the underrated names that maybe some people aren't talking about as much. So first up is Sam Hubbard from Ohio State. He gets the label of being more of the hard worker, not necessarily a star. Do you agree with that?
I think that's absolutely fair. He's a very solid football player. He's pretty stiff. He's not twitched up as an athlete, and he doesn't necessarily have a great plan as a rusher. He's more of a hustle sack guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I also don't think that's a guy that you take up high really in the first 2 rounds, or even for me in the third round. And he will get picked up there. Somebody will like that sort of blue collar mentality. But my sort of reply to somebody on Twitter that was talking about Hubbard way up high was, look, do you take Sam Acho in the first or second round? And they were like, oh no, absolutely not. And I'm like, well, then you don't take Sam Hubbard, because I like Acho. I probably more than most people. He's a very good football player, and he plays an important role on the Bears. But is he a guy you take in the top 2 rounds? No way. And I think that's kind of where Hubbard's going to end up, as a guy that plays a lot of downs, sucks up a lot of defensive snaps, is solid, doesn't let a lot of things through his gap, but isn't going to sort of change the course of games. He's going to be a good, solid football player. And to me, that's not what you're looking for in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, you want guys who change the team. You want as likely of an opportunity at a second contract player, and I would agree that Hubbard doesn't really strike me as that. EJ, so now you can fully gush about a certain special edge rusher from Boston College.
Yeah, Harold Landry. Harold Landry was actually the guy I was really looking forward to writing up first last year, and then he decided to go back to school, and I just kind of had to bite my tongue and say, okay. Again, if he and Key had come out last year, they would have gone. They probably both would have gone top 5, and they certainly would have been 1-2 off the board on in the edge category.
Even over
Landry
Garrett?
led the nation. Landry led the nation that year in sacks. He had 16. Key was right behind him, I think, with 14 or 15 that year. They were just forces, and both of them kind of came back and had rough years. Landry injured his ankle, and still played hard. Came up with, I think, 7 sacks, not as many pressures. Played fairly solidly, but not spectacularly. And everybody that I know that started in with Landry, not with his, sort of sophomore, junior seasons, but with his last season, goes, "What are you looking at?" And I'm like, "Go look at 2016." They go look at 2016, and they're like, "Oh, okay." When he's fully healthy, he's got elite bend. He tested as a phenomenal athlete. His production scores are very, very good. You combine all that, he's looking at sort of his median. It's not his ceiling. It's in between his ceiling and his floor. His median line for his career is likely Pro Bowler, and he's edging up towards the possibility of a ceiling of an All Pro. That's the kind of guy, again, if the ankle is healthy, that you want to take in the first round. And that guy at 8, because of the limited lack of edge and the Bears' need of it, I wouldn't have any issue at all. If they're checked out on the ankle and they think he's fine and he's going to return to that form from a year ago, yeah, absolutely grab that guy at 8 and don't look back, because the farther you go into this draft, the tougher it's going to be to pull true edge talent, and he certainly has it.
Wait, hold, because you kind of you said it just a second ago. If Harold Landry enters the 2017 draft, who would you have ranked higher, Myles Garrett or him?
Myles Garrett, probably. Again, I don't necessarily.
Oh, okay.
I think Garrett is more of a. I think Garrett's more like Chubb for me. You can use him as an edge, but I really think he's that 4-3. Maybe wide 9. You can move him all over, because Garrett's an amazing specimen. He's kind of an alien. He just does. He can do so many things. It's like, hey, can you drop that guy into coverage? Yeah. Do you want to? No, you don't necessarily want to, but you certainly could. He's that good of an athlete. But I see Garrett. I had Garrett ranked more as a 4-3
Okay.
end player. So yeah, I'm talking about pure outside speed edge kind of guys. Key and Landry would have been right there. Garrett's still above them though, and Garrett went number 1, and I think that was probably rightfully so.
What would be your? I'm not sure if this is necessarily something you like doing, but what would your professional comparison be for Landry?
I actually hate doing that. No, I try and stay away from pro comparisons at all costs.
Okay.
The only time I really do them is when I look at the player and I just can't see anybody else except the player I want to compare them to.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, I bring it up. Yeah, it's so hard.
You don't have to strain at it if it's not.
Yeah, it's so hard because people take so much away from comparisons, and they really sort of yank it out of context, because you can compare on who he matches up to athletically from a physical profile.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the career he's going to have, because again, that guy landed in a different, from an analytics perspective on athletic testing and production, when you combine him, he's Jerry Hughes. And I like Jerry Hughes a lot, but he's a guy that didn't flourish until he got to Buffalo. And in Buffalo, a small market, he doesn't get a lot of credit. So people go, Jerry Hughes, I'm not picking Jerry Hughes at 8. No, you're picking Harold Landry at 8, and he's going to go to a different team.
Different player, different context, exactly.
Yeah, so that comps are really, really tough, unless it's just spot on.
Talking with EJ Snyder, previewing some draft positions for the Bears. You can follow him on Twitter at TheDraftsmanFB. This is Robert Zaglinski on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski, and this is Windy City Gridiron Radio at WC Gridiron on Twitter. Follow that as well. We're going to jump over to the interior offensive line, And we're going to start with Will Hernandez from UTEP, EJ. Mauler, a road grader, a guy who really made a name for himself at this year's Senior Bowl in particular.
Yeah, completely agree. Hernandez is a great player. Plays with an edge, very, very strong. Absolutely a great run blocker, but an underrated pass blocker. His offense at UTEP didn't pass as much as some full spreads. They ran the ball a little bit more than your typical college program, but his pass sets are actually really good and somewhat underrated. Now, he did play Conference USA ball, so the folks he was stepping up against, but he gave up something like 5 sacks in, 400 pass attempts or something. Not, or no, it was way more than that, actually. It was like 5 sacks in the last 2 years. His pass sets are not that bad, and like you said, road grading and just mashing people on run blocking is really what people sort of hang their hat on with him. And when he stepped up to the Senior Bowl, he did not look out of place at all. For the first 2 days, nobody got by him in practice. He just ate everybody in one-on-one. So I think he's going to be fine. He's going to be a good pro.
Billy Price from Ohio State. So he tore his pec at the combine, ironically doing the bench press, and we're not sure as to how. That's not a serious tear, but he might be a guy that might miss some time in off-season activities, obviously. But someone you could stash away. What's your thoughts on a fit for the Bears with him?
I think I think there's 2 guys. Price is one, and Frank Ragnow, the center from Arkansas, who's being terribly underrated, is the other. But if the Bears, some people have talked about this, if the Bears want to take one of the centers, because there are several good centers this year, they want to take one of the centers and move Whitehair out to guard and just set him at guard and say, hey, you're going to go to Josh Shitten's spot, and it's going to be you and Long at the guards and one of these centers, starting off the year at center, and just lock that line in. You're going to have a pretty good young line at that point, and you could get some real value on the centers because they're not going to go necessarily as high as some of the higher profile guards we've talked about, especially a guy like Price who's injured. But from everything I've heard, the surgery was fairly straightforward. The healing timeline is about 4 months, so he's probably even going to be available for the end of OTAs. And he's, by all accounts, a fantastic guy in the locker room. He's really smart, made all the calls for Ohio State for blocking and shifts. And he's a big guy. He's very, very powerful. So I would love to see a guy like Billy Price or Frank Ragnow. If you can get him down the board. Ragnow's sneaking up a little bit, but if people are worried about the injury with Price and they get him, they probably have to get him in the second round. He's not going to fall a lot farther than that. But again, if you trade back and you end up with a, fairly decent high 3rd round pick and either one of those guys is sitting there and you haven't already sort of picked a guard, that would be a really viable strategy. I like Price a lot.
You mentioned Ragnow. What's more of the book on him? So the center from
Ragnow's amazing. He's been the highest graded center over the past 2 seasons. And actually, he's been the highest graded. Those 2 seasons are the highest graded seasons by a center ever since PFF started grading college ball, which is like 5 or 6, 7 years. Yeah, that's a thing, right? You haven't – all these guys you've heard about, and you're not hearing his name a lot. And he's a really good player. You think about the running backs that come out of Arkansas, guys like Alex Collins, and, it just goes on back, guys that have played for the Cowboys. And, that's a running program. It has been for a long time. And he is the pivot in that program. He's opening those holes. They run between the tackles a lot. And he's a very, very good player, and his profile is just sort of not matching up to that. Could be that he plays center, certainly a high-profile position, but he is really under the radar for how good he is. I don't think he's that far behind Price at all, and like I said, I really like Price. So either one of those guys could offer the Bears a lot of value if they're willing to, move Whitehair out to guard and just stick him there. But Lester and I have talked about this. Whatever you're going to do with Whitehair, do it and don't change it.
Yeah, this has to be the final decision.
Exactly. Whatever you're going to do with the new coaching staff and the new offense, just say, this is your job, and it's going to be your job for the next 2 or 3 years, and we are not moving you. We promise. Go.
That's interesting that you point that out about Ragnow. So that how he's been the highest grade center, but he's not getting as much acclaim. Why do you think that is? Like in your opinion?
I'm not sure. Obviously, Arkansas is not as high profile program as OSU. OSU is always, tons of guys drafted. You got Urban Meyer. You're sort of in the hunt for the championship before you've ever played a game. Rabid fan base, and Arkansas has a lot of the rabid fan base and everything else. But look, they play in the middle of the country. Different conference. Not a sort of high octane offense in the passing sense. Again, you got to be a little bit more of a sort of football classicist to say, look, they've got 30 rushing attempts a game. That doesn't happen a lot in college anymore at the big spread program. So just a little bit of a lower profile. His athletic testing's not amazing, but a lot of centers aren't. It really comes down to, are they cerebral and can they anchor against bull rush against NFL DTs? And he certainly looks like he can. He's got the functional strength and the size. His size profile is really similar to Price, and they're both good. They're both 6'3", 6'4", 6'4"-ish, well over 200. Well over, getting up 300. I think they're both like 305, 310. So, not little guys who are going to get pushed around. And I'm not exactly sure, but folks in the know, I think, are sort of licking their chops, hoping that Ragnow slides down the board if they have a need for interior O-line, because he's going to be one of those guys. I think we look back in 3 or 4 years and go, man, how did that guy slide to the 3rd or 4th round? He's not going to be in the 4th round, but how did he slide to the middle of the 3rd round when, he's in the Pro Bowl every year?
James Daniels from Iowa, another steady plug and play guy, although not everyone necessarily agrees.
I think he's good, but he's 3rd for me. Jeff Berkey's one of our contributors at Windy City is going to kill me because he's an Iowa alum. He loves his Daniels.
Yeah, Hawkeyes.
He's all about the Hawkeyes. Shout out to Jeff. I like Daniels. He's a good player. He's a smart player. He's not as good as Price or Ragnow, but that doesn't mean he's not good. I think he's the 3rd center, but this is a good year for center. So could you see a guy like that? He's probably going to be available in the 3rd just because he's a center, not because he's bad. But he's not quite as big, and Iowa not really a passing offense in a classic sense. So I'd say less experience with pass protections and shifts than somebody like Billy Price for sure. So a little bit more development maybe, and he looks pretty maxed out to me. He's in great shape. He's not fat at all, but he's also in the they list him at 290, low 290, I think. And he looks pretty maxed. So you wonder if a guy can get up to that sort of anchoring weight of 305, 310 and really hold his own against, the monsters that he's going to see at DT and in the NFL.
Yeah, a little polish there, if the polish can be done. Austin Corbett, so from Nevada, this is a guy that actually draft Twitter caught on in February and January. And I have to agree with that, Love.
Yeah, absolutely. He was a guy I was going to mention if you didn't. Very, very solid player. I would love for Corbett to slide a little bit. I don't think it's going to happen. He's legit. He would be a great plug-and-play guard. Definitely would start as a rookie. He's going to have his lumps like everybody does as a rookie. It is a big jump from college, no matter where you come from. Nevada may be a little bit bigger jump from the Mountain West, but Corbett can play. He's a guy that's shown that. His tape is really impressive. He moves guys off the ball. Very quick, good sets, uses his hands really well, doesn't get beat a whole lot. Yeah, Corbett's legit.
And EJ, your favorite not named Quentin Nelson. So Quentin Nelson is obviously someone that most people are familiar with. That's who a lot of Bears fans want at number 8 if he's there.
Yep.
Blame them.
Nope. So take him if he's there.
Take him if he's there, exactly. So your favorite interior offensive lineman not named Quentin Nelson.
Isaiah Wynn, Georgia. You look at all the success the backs have had at Georgia with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb, and they're both great talents, don't get me wrong. But you look at who opens up a lot of those runs, and it's Isaiah Wynn. And again, a guy that is, I think, equally skilled in pass protection, but so skilled technically as a run blocker. Really good feet, great balance, good body control, gets to the second level very, very easily, good power. Played an SEC schedule, has seen a lot of the players he's going to end up playing against in the NFL. Isaiah Wynn is a no-brainer, but he's not making it past about the middle of the, I would say, first round. If I was the Seahawks and I really wanted to go back to a running game and save Russell Wilson's life, I would pick Isaiah Wynn at 18 and not look back.
Let's say the Bears swing a trade down where they get a pick in the 20s and Wynn's there. Is that something you jump at?
If they're prioritizing guard and they're not going to go after somebody like Corbett or, like we said, one of the centers later, if that's not their sort of tactical plan, and they, sort of knew they always wanted Nelson but knew they didn't want to trade up to get him or whatever that works out to be, and he's there, and, somebody like maybe their favorite edge players are gone because there's been a run, I would absolutely consider him. He's plug and play, day one starter, easily 5-6 year career right away. Everybody's always like, oh, he's a 10-year starter. Well, 10-year starters are really rare. Yeah. He's fantastic. He's definitely a second contract guy. You're going to plug him in. He's going to be great. He's going to open those holes for whoever's running the ball. He's a very good pass protector as well. He's got good feet. He played tackle for a while at Georgia, so he's got that versatility. But yeah, I'd be very comfortable with him in the 20s if they're prioritizing IOL as one of their first picks.
We didn't do this for edge yet, so before we start, underrated interior offensive line, some guys that maybe aren't getting enough acclaim that you want to plug a little bit, EJ, at the edge position.
Yeah, I would have said Corbett, absolutely. Again, draft Twitter's all over Corbett, but a lot of sort of more casual fans haven't heard his name. When I brought him up actually with Lester, who loves line play, he was like, Corbett, oh, really? Another guy that's getting some play that I'm not as wild about, but he's getting some of that same love, is Wyatt Teller from Virginia Tech, a guard. Okay. He's a bit of a different style. He's more of that mauler, but I don't think he's as nuanced in pass protection. So that's obviously going to be a challenge because the league is definitely moving towards a pass heavy offense. So he's going to have a little bit farther to go, but really solid guy, really strong, not quite as light on his feet as some of the other guys we've mentioned. And then a guy that's maybe not underrated, but because these other people are getting mentioned, and it's a pretty good interior O-line class, maybe isn't getting his due, is Braden Smith from Auburn. When you're looking at those Kerryon Johnson highlights and he's busting off all those big runs, Braden Smith is just mashing guys. Again, Auburn doesn't throw the ball a ton, but they do throw the ball. They're not a run-only offense. And Braden Smith is a very, very good player whose name I just don't hear called as much when we're talking about guys like Wynn and Nelson and Hernandez. I'd say he's the tick below that, but I'd say he's above guys like Austin Corbett for sure. And we just don't – he's kind of in that weird middle range where you just don't hear his name that much, but somebody's going to pick him and he's just going to be, a good 5, 6, 7-year starter that is, I could see him going to a place like, if the Titans needed a guard, Braden Smith would go to the Titans and they would just plug him in and he would just roll, right? He'd fit right in with that line.
Wait, in the first round?
No. I'm just saying, he strikes me as that guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, never mind.
No, not in the first round. There's just, there's other guys, but he's a very, very solid player. I would put him like fourth in the guard rankings, probably right behind. So Nelson would lead off for sure because, again, he's crazy. Wynn would be my 2, Hernandez my 3, and then probably Smith would be 4th or 5th, depending on who else slotted in there. He's really good, but he's a tick under those other 3 guys.
A value pick there. I mentioned it, so we didn't touch on underrated edge guys, EJ.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them. Again, guys that are have some skills that aren't necessarily, totally well-rounded players, or guys that you're going to start all the time, but guys that you can bring in situationally. Dorrance Armstrong is a bit of a mystery for me. I really like his tape. His combine wasn't great, and he didn't do a lot better at his pro day. But he kind of has that Leonard Floyd filled out look to him. He's long, he's lanky. He's pretty good. He bends really well. it looks like good speed on tape. He didn't demonstrate that in his testing, so I don't quite know how to reconcile that. But Dorrance Armstrong's a guy to keep an eye on. Ade Aruna out of Tulane is fairly young to football, but boy, he plays very physically. He's gotten better every year. He's a big guy. He's fairly strong. Andrew Link, one of our cohorts at Windy City, said he saw a lot of Willie Young in his tape. He's a little bit bigger than Willie, but I can definitely see the similarity to the play style. A guy you've mentioned before, Duke Ejiofor out of Wake Forest.
I think one of my favorite underrated guy. Really.
Yeah, I like Ejiofor. I think he's a good player.
Good starter, yeah.
Yeah, he's going to be real solid. Again, not a guy that sort of comes in and just blows it up and makes a huge difference, but a guy that is going to give you consistent snaps and is probably going to pick some sacks up just because he does a lot of things fairly well. I don't think he has that trump card. He's not super fast or super long, but he's a very solid player, and I like the way he plays.
You know who I see a lot of in this game? Alex Brown. If we're going to do
you mentioned that. I thought that wasn't bad, actually. Like I said, I kind of struggle with comps myself, but I thought, when I look at it, I could see that. Marquise Haynes is another guy I like, and he reminds me of Leonard Floyd coming out of Georgia. A little bit undersized. It's about 6'3". It's in the 230s, mid 230s. Shows some real burst. Not terribly refined, but I think there's more there. Again, if a coach hooks into him and thinks that he's got a potential to plug in, add maybe 10 pounds and really pick up a system, I think that's a guy that he's not getting a ton of play. He tested pretty well too. He tested better than a guy like Dorrance Armstrong. So, that's a guy that I would look at. He just gives me that Floyd coming out of Georgia vibe, and I'm all about that. So that's great. And I'll give you two other guys that aren't necessarily classic edge players, but I think could actually make a difference as situational rushers. One is a crazy athlete out of USC, Uchenna Nwosu. He's not the biggest guy. He's about 6'2". He goes about 240. Not crazy fast, but does have good bend and does flatten to the quarterback pretty well, but has nutty hops. He knocked down, I think, 12 or 14 passes this year. He got Rosen twice in the UCLA game. He just stands there and pops straight up like a basketball player. It's crazy. It's not like he rushes and puts his hands up. He'll rush. He'll see that, the tackle's there. He'll stand off a couple feet. He'll just wait. And then he just literally, like a volleyball player, just pops up and snaps it. And he actually picked one off doing that this year too. He's just a crazy athlete that doesn't fit the kind of classic edge profile. His arms are a little bit too short. He's only 6'2", but he plays with a ton of effort. And he's an amazing athlete. So I think he's a guy that you could slide around and certainly as a situational rusher, bring in and would still give you a ton of value on special teams as well. So he's one. And the other one, boy, there's a bunch.
Yeah, you can definitely pick out.
Yeah, there's so many guys that have one good sort of single skill or a couple of good single skills. But the other guy I'll bring up is Jannard Avery from Memphis. And
I have not heard this name.
Yeah, his tape is kind of tough because they played him as an inside linebacker, and I think I just don't think that's great. And when his tape lights up is when he slides out, when he kind of goes to that wide 9 alignment, or they line him up as a 4-3 end and he slides off a little bit. He's like 6'1", 240. He's really fast and he's really strong, but that's not, and his arms are kind of short. So it's not the guy that you're classically going to put out at edge. You'd think, oh, well, I hope he can play inside and maybe I'll get some rush out of him. He's not that great inside. He's not that great sorting through the trash. He's okay and he plays with a lot of effort, but he's not sort of a natural gifted inside linebacker. But man, when you move that guy outside, if you just cut up his tape and look at the outside rush edge snaps, he's a very good edge rusher. I mean, he's great with his hands. He's got a couple of different moves. He's got a plan. He'll work back inside. He can hump move like Reggie White used to be able to do. Not that well, but he shows that move where he gets into the tackle and just chuffs him off with one arm and then cuts back to the inside. He'll string 2 and 3 moves together, which is very rare for a college pass rusher. That's like Aaron Donald type hand usage where you see combo rushes routinely, not just once or twice throughout a game, but several times in a row, you'll see him, rip, chop, swim, or something like that. And he, as a rusher, he's just really advanced, but he's a guy that's probably not going to get that opportunity because he's like 6'1", 240, and he just doesn't fit the profile. But man, he's got ability out there. It'd be really fun to see him just as a situational rusher for the first couple of years. I bet he could make some impact because he's just so far ahead of so many of his classmates as a pure sort of, as a rusher.
EJ, great stuff. Thanks for coming on with me this on such short notice, actually, but really great stuff, in-depth stuff, knowledge for Bears fans and listeners to, especially with these underrated names at the end. Like, I mean, I didn't even know I didn't even know that the last few you were touching on. So really, really, really good stuff. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Always fun to share, and looking forward to the draft. It's there's been a ton of movement already with trades and people going up and down, and it's not done yet. It's going to get really interesting. So draft fans have a lot to look forward to this year.
12 days to go is what EJ is referring to. The countdown to single digits will begin soon. That is EJ Snyder. You can follow him on Twitter at the DraftsmanFB. You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. Follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. You can be assured we are going to have you primed for everything for the Bears draft. A bunch of different content as we normally do. This is going to be a fun year. And this has been another episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. As always, stay classy, everybody.